I'm shy. I know. We need to talk. I pray for God to send a few women with grit in them. Women who, when they know a thing to be right, will not turn away or turn aside or stop. Women who will persevere all the more because there are difficulties to meet or foes to encounter. Who stand all the more true to their master because they are opposed. Who, the more they are thrust into the fire, the hotter they become. Who, just like the bow, the further the string is drawn, the more powerfully it sends forth its arrows. And so the more these women are trodden upon, the more mighty they will become in the cause of truth. We're going to spend some time together, and I'm going to unpack with you how I went from being engaged to the love of my life and the man I thought I was going to marry in September 2022 to being a single woman with no form of connection or contact with that same man in November 2022. Am I ready to tell the tale? It's going to be a difficult video, but it's exciting. So before turning on this camera today, I prayed because I understand how sensitive in nature this topic is. Many of us have been through breakups. Maybe a few of us have been through broken engagements, but all of us know what it feels like to endure pain, emotional pain, rejection, betrayal, grief, loss of some form. So a lot of those themes will be touched upon in this video, and it's my desire that the content of this video will encourage you, will help you, will light your way, will be a source of wisdom as you navigate the field of dating and relationships, and also a testimony of God's goodness and faithfulness in my life such that you can see it more clearly in your own. So I'll be sharing as much as is necessary for me to relay various points, but no more. I'm acutely aware of the need and the desire to still honour the man that I once was going to marry and that I once knew as the love of my life. So unfortunately, this isn't a rant, this isn't an event, this isn't a slandering show, but more of a heart-to-heart, from my heart to yours. So I was in this relationship for just over 2 years, and after that point it ended. Why did the relationship end? So as I've processed and reflected on the events leading up to the breakup of the relationship, I've come to the conclusion that the main reason why this relationship ended was because of a disunity, and that was made manifest in 3 main ways. The first was seeds of inabilities to agree on and commit to or follow through on timelines. There was a constant inability to be on the same page completely, and there were delays. There were small hints of a lack of clarity and a lack of a shared vision, and I think that made it very difficult for me as a woman to submit to leadership when the leadership wasn't massively forthcoming and strong. And this resulted in conflict. The second manifestation of disunity in our relationship was as a result of the sin on both of our parts. You know, I'm a sinner. I was in a relationship with a sinner, of course, both loving the Lord and desiring to follow him and be more and more like him. But ultimately, we were both sinners. And so our sin that we threw and tossed towards each other caused separation between us. On my part, there were childhood abandonment issues that I still work through till this very day, and a lack of respect for him as the man and as an image bearer of God that he is. And on his part, the issues included pornography, that was an ongoing battle and struggle, as well as a lack of cherishing and loving me as the bride of Christ that I am. And the third manifestation of disunity in our relationship arose from external factors. So when it came to involving parents and family and different ideas being spun into the mix and different positions of power and different desires came in, it drove us apart from one another. There was this I guess, fundamental inability for us to leave and cleave, and to leave the ideas of family members and heritage and culture and cleave to one another steadfastly in love. And I think that was where the manifestation of betrayal came through, where we were unable to pledge a greater allegiance to each other than we were pledging to our respective families. How did the relationship end practically? So it was triggered by an incident that happened over a weekend when I went to go and visit him and his family. However, I think even before that weekend, I already knew that the relationship was coming to a crossroads. And this was something I had between me and the Lord. So entering into a dating relationship is a transient thing for me. It's not something I hope to stay in for long. And at the age of 24, when I entered the relationship, for me, that cutoff point was 2 years. So after 2 years, I wanted to know, are we marrying or are we moving on? I'm not going to date you indefinitely, and I don't expect you to date me indefinitely if there's no commitment. And so I wasn't interested in dating indefinitely, and that was something I made quite clear from the beginning. And so because we had already come up to that 2-year point and we hadn't yet fully decided what we were doing, I knew that a decision is coming either way. So as a woman, as a Christian woman, if you haven't decided upon those sort of boundaries or stipulations for you prior to entering into a dating relationship, you will quickly fall into a position of not really moving forward either way. And it takes courage. It takes courage to be able to assert boundaries. It takes courage to be able to set time limits for yourself and to honor yourself if those time limits aren't met for, good reasons, and to also not be afraid to let go of loves if they aren't aligning with what the Lord is doing in your life. The main reasons why I do stipulate sort of time boundaries on dating, give or take, is because I know my heart and I know myself. And the desire or the temptation to commit sexual immorality rises with time. And I want to honor the Lord to the death. Like, there's nothing that would be more valuable for me than remaining a woman of virtue and dignity up until the day I marry, and even through my marriage. And so I knew for myself that spending time with a man who's professing godliness, who isn't moving things towards marriage or clearly saying, look, you're not the woman for me, wouldn't be the place I wanted to stay in indefinitely. Between you and me, I have friends who dated for 4 years, 6 years, some more, and the relationship ended after that time stamp. And it's just time invested, emotions invested, love awakened. And that was never something for me that I saw or still see as valuable or honorable. So after that 2 years had crossed, I was 100 times more keen to really know where this was headed, or if it was headed anywhere. I'd committed those things from the start, but at that point I was like, okay, what's going on? Where are we going? Either way, I'm good. Like, if we're getting married, I'd love to marry you, I'd love to be with you, but if not, let me go, let me continue on my journey. Unfortunately, it ended on the phone just due to the circumstances that we found ourselves in at the time. I was working and he was in a different city, and so it wasn't feasible at that point to meet up. It's something that I do wish I'd done differently. I wish we had had that conversation in person. And after that, I made the effort to see him in person just to tie up any loose ends. But it ended on the phone, and it ended in a really lovely way. We prayed for each other, we encouraged each other. I assured him that he's still my brother in the Lord, and I wish him well, and I want him to continue on in his journey and continue to grow, continue to serve, continue to figure out who he is, get clarity for his future, and do all of those things that the Lord desires him to do as a future household leader. And I would do the same for myself. And how did I know the exact point when I had to end the relationship? I knew before I did it. So I knew in my heart that the relationship was over. Some of the signs of it having to end was a constant toing and froing, a little bit of vacillation, indecision, changing mind, one day saying this, one day saying the next thing, a bit of double-mindedness. That was when I knew this isn't the space that the Lord would have me. As a woman, even if we go back to the Garden of Eden, when the Lord introduced Adam to Eve, the Lord ensured that the garden was ready. and things around her were ready. The man was ready. The man had work. The man had clarity of vision. The man knew his purpose. And then he brought Eve into that safe space of clarity and vision. And so when I found myself being in a space of disorder, I knew, okay, the honorable thing would be to walk away from this and trust the Lord with whatever's coming next. It was a quick turnover. I mentioned that I went to visit his family over a weekend. That was early November. By the 3rd week in November, the relationship was over. So it was a really quick turnaround, maybe 10 days, 14 days. And during that time, there were 3 of my closest sisters that I told them to pray for me. I told them to pray for me. One of them knew. Like, God uses people to help you when you're going through things. So do not shut people out. I beg you, do not shut people out. She knew, and I said to them, I said, look, sisters, I can't share too much, but please just be praying that the Lord's will be done. And that was the prayer. The prayer wasn't, Lord, help this to work, or Lord, may this go ahead at all costs, or Lord, scatter my enemies or anything. At every stage, it was, Lord, let your will be done. And also that was our prayer when we were in the relationship together. At every stage we prayed with each other, let the Lord's will be done. Let the Lord's will be done. And so I had a confidence that because I had prayed that prayer, not only once, but for months and for years, that the ending of that relationship was the Lord having his best will at that time for both of us. And so when it came to ending the relationship, we both agreed that friendship wasn't for us. I knew that couldn't happen. I wasn't going to deceive myself or defraud him by still being in his life as a friend when actually we were engaged, planning a life together and loved one another deeply. So we both agreed that the best thing to do would be to cut contact and to move on with our lives. And I loved that. I loved that we walked away cleanly, and we walked away with our eyes wide open, and we didn't give each other any leads of false hope regarding, oh, maybe in the future we'll get back together. Those sort of ideas I dismissed, because I think it's so important as we deal with one another as brothers and sisters that we do not defraud each other, and that we honor one another as image bearers of God. And if we're not willing to commit to a covenant, that we let that person go fully and completely. So what were my initial thoughts as I processed the ending? Well, I had peace. I had complete peace, because I knew I had conducted myself in an honourable way. And something you must know about me, admittedly, I can be very masculine in my thinking. I can be very critical, I can be very black and white, I can be very tunnel visioned. And so because I had that peace and that go ahead from the Lord that I needed to get out, the first couple of days, I think I was on the adrenaline high of, yes, you've done the right thing, and yes, it's over, but you've honoured the Lord. And so the Lord just cushioned me. He really cushioned me. He was my shock absorber for the first couple of days up to about a week. I continued as normal. I was going to work. I was having social events. And even after the call where I ended the relationship, I went to a coffee lounge and was having some conversation with some friends. So I had maybe a numbing, or maybe the Lord absorbing some of the shock of the relationship, because I had been obedient to him, which allowed me to function near right normal. And then obviously as time went on and I realized that the relationship was over and things had to change in my life, that was when I started to work through the healing of the emotional pain and the emotional hurt. At the end of a relationship, it's important to take upon yourself the responsibility to move into a state of acceptance. That is the biggest game changer, because when you accept the reality of what is now, and you accept the reality of what was, and not allowing the new reality to take away from the past reality, I think that accelerates your healing, because you're able to move into a place without denial and without a false hope for what may come in the future. So I moved into a place of acceptance pretty quickly. Notwithstanding, I had a lot of emotional fallout from the relationship ending, but this made it clear for me that I was fully free and fully able to move forward without any hang-ups. Another key thing that I went through as I processed the end of the relationship was taking full responsibility for my part in that ending of the relationship, for my flaws, for my sin, for my errors, for my lack of love, for my disrespect, for my issues, for all that I brought to the relationship that contributed to it ending. We often bypass this. When a relationship ends or when something happens, we point the finger, we blame, we lay blame on others, and we fail to take responsibility and to bring our own selves to account. But the Lord pressed that on my heart really early on, that I needed to reflect on how I'm accountable for this ending and the things that He would have me do differently, better, in a more refined way moving forward. And that took away a huge burden off of me, because I knew that I was moving forward in right standing with God. And in this, I also had to courageously forgive. I had to forgive him. I had to forgive his family for a lot of the things that were said and a lot of the accusations that were made and just the hurt I felt in my heart. And I had to forgive even though there was no repentance, you know, like there was no acknowledgement or apology. Moving into the grief, the loss, and the heart work, the emotional heart work that I had to endure over the next couple of months. So after the adrenaline high and the rationalization worn off, after about a week or so, and I had to face the reality that, whoa, the man that I loved is no longer in my life at all. It was tough, like it was really difficult for me. I remember I had a WhatsApp group of wedding planning. In that WhatsApp family group for wedding planning, I remember my sister putting a message in the group saying that everyone should say a prayer for me. I had all my family in there. Everyone should say a prayer for me, and then we would close the group and trust that the Lord would provide a way for another group with another man of a similar nature to be opened at some point. And so I got loads of different messages streaming in, and I kept those messages. I still have them to today, and it was a huge source of encouragement, just having support and people around me that walked through it with me, even though I was the one who had to really process. I didn't kind of go through it and then start telling people, like, When I was in the middle of it, the people who needed to know knew, and they rallied round and they prayed for me and they supported me. So let's get into some of the healing work that I had to go through, and I've split this down into internal and external things that I needed to deal with. And in the internal category, there are 4 big things that I had to deal with. The first was shame, the second was loss, and the third was betrayal. So let's talk about shame. I remember when the relationship ended, that feeling of shame hit me like a ton of bricks. This probably stems from the fact that I'm a high achiever. I strive for excellence and I perform excellently in many different areas of my life. And for something to almost come across as a failure for me was something I had to really grapple with. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've been through breakups before, but this was different because we had become engaged and it felt as though we had failed at the last hurdle. That's exactly how I can put it. So I had to remind myself of the truth that no, this is a lie. You know, any relationship that I enter into with the desire for marriage, seeking the Lord's will, if that relationship ends, no matter how it ends or when it ends, that is a success because I ultimately want God's will. I don't want God to permit me to marry if that's not the man I should marry, and vice versa. And I don't want to see the ending of a thing as a sign of that thing had been a waste or being not worthwhile, because then there was temptation for me to feel like, oh, you know, I've wasted 2 years of my life, and you know what? No, like none of that time was wasted. Of course, it's sad that it didn't end in marriage, but ultimately the shame that I was feeling was not justified. When we pray for things, we pray and we submit those prayers to God's sovereignty, and we pray things with an acknowledgement that the answer to this prayer may be no, and that's okay. You know, if the answer is no, in fact, Lord, let me take that no, because you know what you've seen that I have not seen. You know what is to come that I have not even anticipated for. And so your no is a no of love, not a no of vindication or deprivation. And so as I began to renew my mind concerning those things, the shame I felt just dissipated. Second thing I had to face was loss. So there were two main losses: the losses of a potential future and the losses of a person. So let's talk about the loss of a potential future. This is where it became a lot more difficult for me, because plans had started to be made. I had a wedding day planned, I had gone dress shopping, he had looked at suits, we had started planning the ceremony, we had got in touch with different pastors and different churches, we had started creating a guest list, we had informed a few people. Now to go back and retract all of that, and to now not only retract it but say, okay, what is my new year looking like, was really hard. This was towards the end of 2022, so I had somewhat mapped out my 2023, and a lot of that mapping out had to do with this man, had to do with this person that I was thinking I would marry. And so to now go back to the Lord on my knees and say, okay God, this is not the future you have for me anymore. I need you to give me new desires for my future. I need you to renew in me a new desire and a new passion and a new zeal for 2023, Lord. I need you to show me what 2023 is all about. And that's where the perfection word came from. That was hard though. Like, that was astronomically difficult. And it took for me to be flexible and to adapt to the ever-changing manifestation of God's will. I remember one of my sisters prayed for me, and this girl was prophesying and she didn't even know she was prophesying. Like, she was saying to me how the Lord can give me new dreams for my 2023, and she was praying over newness for me. She was praying over understanding. She was praying for discernment. She was praying for opportunity. She was praying for open doors, and all of those are the things that I knew at that point where I was in the middle of an end engagement and trying to see the wood from the trees. That was exactly what I needed to hear. And the Lord has answered those prayers, and He's given me an amazing new vision for the future, and a zeal for life, and a passion for life, and excitement as it concerns all areas of my life. The other side of loss was the loss of a person. So this man was so many different things to me. He wasn't everything to me though, which I'm so grateful for, and I will come on to that later. But he was obviously my love, and he was a friend. And I think those were the two main roles that he played in my life. And when the relationship ended, not only did I lose the romantic side, but I lost the friendship, I lost the companionship, I lost the laughs, the fun, I lost the banter, I lost just the experience of knowing him. And it felt like someone had died. So in 2021, my grandma died, and obviously she was gone as a person in my life. Couldn't see her again, couldn't experience things with her again, couldn't make new memories. And it was very similar to losing a person. And so I thank God that God had almost trained me in some ways as I walked through the grief of my grandma to be prepared for losing this man in a similar way. So I had to let go of certain memorabilia, I had to throw away certain memories that would hinder me from moving forward. I had to rethink the plans in my weeks, because we had certain days of the week where we would speak or do devotionals or read the word or pray. So I had to just make loads of different adjustments to my life to minimize his influence and maximize the other influences that were still alive and present and going forwards with me into the future. And part of mourning the loss of him as a person, a huge part of that was giving thanks to the time that we shared together and acknowledging the work that God had accomplished through the relationship in us, and also submitting again humbly to the path of the journey that he will be going on in future, and praying into that for him and saying a blessing over him and trusting that God sees him where he is, and because of that I can fully let go and fiercely move on into my own journey. So I think I've processed that really well, and I'm in a great place now. And the final internal work that had to be dealt with was betrayal. The feeling of being betrayed, the feeling of being left, that familiar feeling of, oh, was everything a lie? You know, he said he loved me, he got down on one knee, he proposed, he said he wanted me to be his wife, he said he wanted me to have his children, he said this, he said that, and da 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 da. And those thoughts and attacking ideas coming to mind, making me feel like I'd been betrayed. And I had to process that with a godly lens, because otherwise that would have led me down the road of bitterness, and that would have led me down the road of, in quote, all men are trash kind of thinking, which I have no business thinking that. All men are made in the image of God, and I know that the Lord has good men out there. And through processing betrayal, I meditated on some scriptures in Corinthians where it talks about us knowing in part and seeing in part. And so that helped me to understand that no, everything wasn't a lie. But with all the information we had at the time, with all the information I had, all the information he had, those were truths for him. You know, when he said he loved me, he believed it to be true, and so he said it. And likewise, when I said I loved him, I believed it to be true, and so I said it. But as more information came into play, as different hues of knowledge came, as different understandings came, we drew to different conclusions, which meant that although those things were once true, they no longer can be true. And this is why I'm a big advocate for seeking clarity over intimacy. When there's Christ-centered clarity, when you are able to come together as a unified couple, curate a vision for the future and pursue it, that is so much more important than the emotional intimacy and the physical intimacy, of course, which should come after marriage. And so I'm really grateful for the way in which we steward each other's hearts in the relationship, and we stewarded each other with boundaries, we stewarded each other with hedges that meant we were able to guard one another's purity. We did have our slip-ups, we did have areas where we sinned and where we had to, you know, really tighten up those boundaries and really tighten up those hedges. But by the grace of God, largely our desire was to shield one another in the event that the relationship didn't lead to marriage. We could still leave each other whole with something to offer as a gift to our future spouses. So one of the things that I am really grateful to the Lord for about in this relationship was how I was able to maintain an individual identity, and how I also encouraged this man to maintain his own sense of identity, in that we didn't become each other's lives. I had my own friends, I had my own interests, I had my own support networks, I had my own time, and I had the things that I did that I loved, that I maintained, and I encouraged him to do so. And so we kept each other accountable about, look, we're not married, we're still single. Yes, we're in a relationship, or we're working towards that, we desire marriage, but we're not. And so you need to continue to be all that God has called you to be. You need to continue to do your hobbies. You need to continue to have your own time, your rest, your Sabbath. You need to continue to have your private devotional, your private Bible study. And that for me was probably the biggest gift that I was given in that relationship, and the biggest gift that I gave myself, because in leaving the relationship, as much as a part of me did die, all of me didn't die. It was just a fraction. And that freed up space for me to enlarge in all the other things in my life. So often what can happen in a relationship is that we give away so much of ourselves and we lose ourselves. And then when that relationship ends, we are shattered and broken because we don't even know who we are. We've let all our friends go, we've let all our support systems go, we've let all our hobbies go, we've let all our interests go, we've let all our passions go, and then we have to now rebuild from scratch. Don't let that be you. Be a woman who is able to keep boundaries on how much you give emotionally, physically, spiritually to any man who has not made a covenantal commitment to be your husband. And then moving on to the external things that I had to process. The first one was the planning and the unplanning. So I, in the first week or so, sent out a bunch of emails to different vendors and venues and people about cancelling and breaking the news that basically we no longer deem ourselves suitable for marriage, and so we're going to go our separate ways. Thank you for your support, something along those lines. And doing that for me was another step into the healing because it made it real. The next external thing that I had to deal with was telling people and breaking the bad news. This was difficult in some ways because it meant with each time I retold the story or I retold the news that I'm no longer engaged, I relived the pain that I felt during the time when it ended. And this was particularly difficult at work because I had obviously been wearing an engagement ring for a number of months. And then, of course, I stopped wearing the engagement ring, and some people would ask, some people wouldn't. And I felt even more awkward when people wouldn't ask, because it's like, you know, but you don't want to say. And so that was a bit of an awkward thing to navigate. But in terms of telling people, this is where I had to seek the Lord about being wise and discerning in how much to share. Similar to what I said at the start of this video about being discreet as a woman who shares enough to be able to get a point across, but not too much that you dishonor the other, or that you bring shame or reproach onto the other person's name. So I told different people different things, all that were very true. I mean, my closest friends and, you know, people I would consider sisters, they got a lot of what happened. People who were a bit more peripheral, people who were a little bit more removed, got a bit more of a general approach, and people who didn't know at all didn't need to get anything. And I think I had peace about doing that with the Lord, because ultimately this is my story that the Lord has given to me. The final external thing that was a huge challenge for me was the day when I had to go and collect my wedding dress. Oh, I cried so hard that day. I remember telling my mum, and I was really anxious. I was really anxious because I think that was something that I did with sisters. I went to do wedding dress shopping with some of my sisters, like close friends, and reliving the memories of it and recognizing that you're not getting married anymore was made so much realer when I had to now go and collect that wedding dress. So that was a tough day for me. I remember also having to think through, what am I going to tell the woman, because I had such a lovely dress designer and a boutique that I went to, and she was so kind and caring, and we had a good old chat. I drove down, I went to get in, I knocked on the door, and she came and opened the door to me, and I just shook my head. I couldn't even talk. I was shaking my head, and she just came and hugged me, and she was like, oh my gosh, what's happened? Are you okay? And I said, I'm not getting married anymore. And so that led to a really long heart-to-heart. I sat down, we spoke, she encouraged me. I mean, I don't know if she's a believer or what, but the Holy Spirit was speaking through her all the same. She encouraged me, and she said, you know, you're going to be back here one day, and you're going to be doing this, going through this process with the man who you will marry. And then anticipating the proposed wedding date was another challenge. So what I did, I spoke to a couple of my close friends, and I had this idea that I wanted to travel. I wanted to go abroad. I mean, I was going to spend money on a wedding, we were going to spend money on a honeymoon, we were going to spend money on a place to stay, etc. So I thought to myself, yeah, this is a great time for you to have a different way of marking this period of time, such that for years to come it will not be a time which brings a sense of doom or gloom or anxiety or sadness. So I planned a group trip abroad, which was phenomenal. I went to Sri Lanka, so many good experiences, good food, a new start. Like, I think that trip abroad was my crossover. And obviously the wedding day followed during that trip, and on that day I prayed. I was able to spend time with the Lord. So I did that for myself, and I completely love myself for doing it. So that big trip abroad was in May, because that was when the proposed wedding date was going to be. So that takes us up to 6 months post end of engagement. And even up until that time and going forwards, the support that I received from my family, my friends, my sisters, some of the colleagues that I'm closer to has been phenomenal. The presence of people in my life in this time has been great, just to carry me. There have been some days where I'm sitting at a 4 and I'm just going through the motions. And then there's other days where it doesn't cross my mind and I'm just living and I'm just going. So it is pretty much a grief cycle, and there are different stages of grief. And I've touched upon this in different healing videos, and I'm so grateful that God has given me the opportunity to relive it and put it into practice and see Him through the grief and through the healing that He's doing and has done in my life. So what does the onward journey look like for me now? Where am I now? Day by day, this looks like trusting and loving the Lord. While you're in a relationship, and scriptures talks about this, that, you know, the married woman is devoted to her husband, how to please him, but the single woman is devoted to the Lord, how to be pure in body and spirit. Of course, I wasn't married, but in some ways I felt the natural pressures of being in a relationship and giving love and pouring yourself out and praying for another person and cultivating them and showing up for them and being there for them. It does naturally take away some of that space and time that you would ordinarily give to the Lord, if nothing else. And so since that relationship has ended, I've had so much more emotional and heart space for the Lord, and I've just packed it on. I've packed it on, and I've experienced that devotional love, that sweet, compassionate, tender, present, husband-like love of the Lord in a way that I've never experienced before. Day by day also looks like just looking after myself, you know, doing the basic things that should be done, eating well, exercising, trying to get enough sleep, having effective and stimulating social interactions, challenging myself by cultivating different skills, and just being holistic in my approach to myself. But can I be really candid for a moment? In all of this, I think the biggest challenge I've had to face is resubmitting those desires I had for marriage and to have children again to the Lord. It was almost like love had been awakened almost to the point of consummation at that point of engagement, and then now having to put it all the way back to sleep, that was and is still a challenge. Like, I am really fighting day by day to submit those desires to the Lord and to enjoy the beauty of my singleness, because singleness is beautiful. I do not despise my singleness at all. I love it. I think it's a great place, and it's given me so many opportunities to serve and to love and to build myself. However, the competing desire of wanting marriage and wanting children remains. And I do believe that this is just part of the cross that I have to carry in this season, and I'm prepared to carry that cross. And the conclusion of that is for me to sit tight and sit confidently in the knowledge that I am God's daughter, and nothing can thwart his plans for me. God's good plans for me as his daughter doesn't hinge upon another man's decision. His plans stand, his word stands, and they will be made manifest in the right time and in the right way. And the final thing I'll touch on before we close out this video is a question I get asked a lot more frequently than I thought is, am I ready to date again? Since the engagement ended in November, I have been pursued by men. I've been pursued by Christians and non-Christians alike. I've had to turn a lot of pursuit down because I wanted to be intentional about the space I needed to heal. I didn't want to rush into things. I didn't want to be tempted to bypass the hard work, and I know I'm in a much better place for it. So in the early stages after the relationship ended, I knew I wasn't ready to date. Since then, I have been open to dating and just being very cautious with the condition of my heart, being a guardian of my heart and my affections, and welcoming it. You know, it's lovely as a woman to be wooed. It's lovely as a woman to be desired and pursued, but only as it aligns with God's choice and God's instructions surrounding finding a godly spouse. And so, as much as those ideas for me were very clear when I was 22, 23, 24, at this age of 27, they are so much more clearer. And so it's just helped me to weed out, you know, serious people from unserious people. Not that some men are not serious, but they're not serious in the way in which I need them to be serious, you know. So my heart is open, my heart is healed, and of course healing is not linear, it's cyclical, but my heart is healed to the point where I am open and ready to experience and accept what the Lord has. And it's so beautiful to welcome the pursuit of a man who is godly and who really knows what he wants. And so I prayerfully am in a position where I can consider those things. So that's the end of my story. I hope it's been an encouragement to you. I want to extend my hand to say that if you are going through a breakup or an engagement breakup or anything of the sort, I mean, all breakups are unique and different in many ways. I'm here if you need someone to talk to, if you need someone to bounce ideas off, if you need some encouragement or prayer. I mean, I've walked through probably one of the hardest breakups besides from divorce that there is. And so as much as I've shared a lot on this, I haven't shared everything. And if you ask me questions that speak to a specific area of my experience, as the Lord leads, I will share more and give you some of those pearls that you may need to help you on your healing journey. Thank you so much for joining me for this, and I will see you again in my next one. Bye.